Memoirs of a Dad, Chapter 6. Over that weekend, Tom and I explored the immediate area, visiting Artington, a village famed for the production of Stilton cheese, and also the Manifold Valley. The latter is a limestone gorge carved out of the landscape by the River Manifold, which rises high up on the moorlands above Axe Edge to the southwest of Buxton, close by the source of the Dove and the Goyt. It is notable for disappearing underground for large stretches of its journey through the valley, only becoming visible during periods of high rainfall. Both the Manifold and the Dove are tributaries of the River Trent, whereas the Goyt flows westward to meet the River Tame at Stockport, where the two rivers form the mighty River Mersey. Like many of these seemingly wild areas of the Peak District, the Manifold Valley has been a scene of human labour for centuries before our modern industrial age, being an area rich in minerals as well as sheep and cattle. Neolithic man lived and worked here, as witnessed by the archaeology of Thor's Cave, and Bronze Age man exploited its supplies of copper long before the Romans migrated to the area. A paved track runs the full length of the valley from its head at Hume End, large sections of which are quite separate from a lane open to motorists, making it ideal for walkers and cyclists alike. Originally, this was the bed of a narrow-gauge railway, built to transport copper from nearby Ecton Hill, also known as the Hollow Hill. Ecton Hill is not half the size that it once was, it being so rich in copper. The hill, in effect, ended up spread throughout Britain. It was one of the main sources of wealth of the mighty Devonshires, whose stately home is at Chatsworth, and whose estates also include Bolton Abbey and Lismore Castle in Ireland. Many of the historic buildings in central Buxton were built with the proceeds from this mine. We also visited the Mermaid, a historic coaching inn on the high and wild Staffordshire moorlands near the Mermaid's Pool on Morridge, a point more distant from the sea than can be found in many parts of England. Legends abound about such places, the most recent about this particular Mermaid's Pool being that once upon a time, a long time ago, a gentleman by the name of Joshua Linnet made certain advances to a young woman who rejected them. Enraged as a result, Joshua, no doubt being a good man and of devout Protestant stock, denounced her as a witch, as a consequence of which she was thrown into the pool, whose actual name is Blakemere, and thereby drowned. However, the tale relates that the beautiful woman's spirit had its revenge, for within a few days the gentleman was discovered next to the pool, the skin of his face shredded as if by claws, or long sharp fingernails well manicured. I suspect, however, that the real legend is much older. Take a look at the map, and you discover that all this part of Staffordshire and Derbyshire is dotted with the historical evidence of human occupation over thousands of years. Many of the names of the highest points are given the appendage Low, a pre-7th century name for a burial place. Tumuli and henges abound, the best known being the stone circle at Arborough, as do disused mines, very few of which were for coal. Above all, this is the land of the pagan Celts and their predecessors, a land where you can let your own imagination run rife and bring them back to life. The Celts were a noble and highly mobile people, migrating through Western Europe to the British Isles with their horses. They had received the secret of smelting iron, whilst the Romans were still trapped in the Bronze Age, and although they had not developed the art of writing, were so rich in knowledge and so good at passing that knowledge on by the spoken word, were highly prized by the Romans as tutors for their children. It is no accident that their last great stronghold, the island of Ireland, is still noted for its storytelling. My own particular view is that the original mermaid who inhabited this lonely high moorland place was no mermaid at all. I believe, or rather my imagination informs me, she was none other but Coventina, the ancient Celtic water goddess. She, so legend and my imagination tell me, also inhabited the mermaid's pool near Kinderlow in the Dark Peak, where another female, in this case an old wise woman, found herself denounced as a witch by local farmers and condemned by the local parson. She also was thrown into the pool and drowned. In that particular case, though, Coventina is said to have dragged the parson into the cold dark depths and forced him to labour night and day, servicing the needs of the old woman and herself for ever and a day. Whatever the myths behind these conjectures of mine, the ride out to the mermaid was well worth it. The views from Morridge are spectacular, the geological landscape around being amazingly varied. From here, at the very southern tip of the Pennine chain, you can see the spectacular anti-syncline of Goldsich Moss, bounded by the shattered and upfolded gritstone rocks of the Roaches, Ramshaw Rocks and Encloud to your west. To the east lies the high, undulating, green-pastured limestone plateau of South Derbyshire, whilst to the north the giant breaking wave-shaped limestone remnants of prehistoric coral reefs, the hangovers from some primeval sea, can be clearly discerned, now standing high and dry, hundreds of feet above sea level. In the limestone regions the very rocks are replete with a record of life, full of fossils of long extinct fauna and flora, the limestone itself being formed from layer upon layer of the remnants of crustaceans and other aquatic life that once abounded in a tropical sea, a permanent reminder of the relative brevity of our own evolution as a species. In addition to these delights of nature and the wanderings of his old man's rich imagination, Tom found himself entertained by the sight of the majestic wings of gliders taking off and eventually landing, after having soared high up in the clear blue sky from a spot close to the pub, courtesy of the Staffordshire Gliding Club. Here we had lunch, after which we returned via Hobbay, Upper and Lower Elstone and Warslow, to Hugh Mend and thence to Alstonefield, just in time for an evening session in the George with our friends, before retiring to the shelter of our mountain tent once more. Before returning to our tent, however, we walked around the village, admiring the old church and its architecture, and enjoying the sight of bats flitting about the dusky sky. Towards the end of another perfect day, my own thoughts a million miles away from the cares and tribulations of life in Manchester. Inevitably, we eventually had to return home. Our journey took us over to the Roaches, from where we headed to Macclesfield via Wildbow Clough, and then to the village of Alderley Edge. This, too, is a place of legend and myth, the most notable of which is the legend of the Wizard of Alderley. The Edge itself, from which the village is named, is a large sandstone mass rising from the northeastern edge of the Cheshire Plain, and it, too, is a hollow hill, being riddled with ancient copper mines going back to pre-Roman times. Having stopped in the village for tea and cake, I stumbled upon a copy of Alan Garner's book, The Weird Stone of Brisingamen, which gives a twist to the ancient legend by telling how the wizard reappeared at the outset of World War II and involved two children, a boy and a girl, evacuated from Manchester to avoid Nazi bombing, to battle with the forces of darkness when once again Britain was in danger from malevolent and mysterious evil forces. It is a book I have no doubt my son will remember to this day, with a mixture of excitement, fear, and embarrassment, if anybody close to him was to mention it. Of all the many books I read to him at bedtime, This was the one from which he hid under the duvet, only to reappear in case something caught him in the dark. Our cycling adventures in that year of 1986 had got off to a good start. Later in the year, we would be persuaded by a friend of mine, Morris, who worked at the Bicycle Doctors, the workers' cooperative I have already mentioned, and from whom I was now getting orders for my made-to-measure frames, to enjoy a cycling holiday in France. I protested that I did not have the money, but in the end, after careful thought, I decided this wouldn't be a problem, and so me and Tom made the journey to Cherbourg, having caught a train from Manchester to Weymouth. However, before that momentous holiday, we had the Bluegrass Festival at the end of May to look forward to in Edale, and thus our adventures had hardly begun